Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about something called toxic femininity. In order to talk about toxic femininity, we must first talk about toxic masculinity. I think most people are familiar with toxic masculinity, or at least have some idea of what it's about, but it's not so common to hear people talk about toxic femininity, which is the topic of today's video. Both toxic masculinity and toxic femininity negatively impact men and women, but toxic femininity is harder to detect because it's much more subtle than toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is the idea that our society pressures men and boys to conform to what are considered traditional masculine traits to their own detriment. According to toxic masculinity, men are socially conditioned to portray certain masculine characteristics, which causes them to be prone to things like aggression, emotionlessness, being power-hungry, being dominant, sexually entitled, headstrong, and violent. The idea is that these traits emerge in men who have been socialized to be a stereotypical heterosexual male, and this interferes with their ability to develop their emotions and display vulnerability in healthy relationships. According to the doctrine of toxic masculinity, men who have been conditioned to be ultra-masculine are also a threat to women because it leads to domestic violence and crime in general. The vast majority of violent criminals are male, including offenders of domestic abuse and sexual assault, and this is attributed to the socialization that toxic masculinity brings about. The belief is that toxic masculinity is oppressive for men because it causes them to stifle their emotions, and it harms women by encouraging men to dominate them. In an article I read from verywellmind.com concerning toxic masculinity, members of the American Psychological Association have concluded that, drawing on more than 40 years of research, the APA suggests that features of traditional masculinity are psychologically harmful. They also report that socializing boys to suppress their emotions creates damage, both inwardly and outwardly. I reject the assertion that boys who grow up to embrace traditional masculinity are automatically bad people who are destined to become emotionally repressed and abusive men. So now I'm going to talk about standards. I genuinely feel bad for men in our postmodern society because the standards that women have for men have become unreachable. Women typically want men who are protective, courageous, self-sufficient, ambitious, and independent, but only in the right ways. They want a man who is capable of being a provider, but only if he communicates like a woman. They want to pick and choose which masculine traits they want in a man, but they don't seem to understand that this is not a buffet, right? This is not Ponderosa. You can't pick and choose which masculine traits are acceptable because all of the traits associated with toxic masculinity are interrelated and come from the fact that men evolved to hunt. You could say that male aggression is always bad, except that it's not. If someone breaks into your home and attempts to assault you, would you as a woman want your man to get aggressive with that person as a means to protect you and your children? What about war? Men evolved to hunt and protect women and children, and that's why they get angry and aggressive, because it served a vital purpose in the past. Women are trying to reverse entire eras of evolution by dictating which emotions men are allowed to feel, and it can't be done. Having the ability to put emotions aside when making serious decisions makes someone competent. Emotionality causes people to make bad decisions and do irrational things. Anger is one of the most natural things there is. It comes from the amygdala, which is one of the oldest parts of our brains. In the past, anger motivated men to fend off predators and combat hostile humans. What's happening now is that anger must be suppressed by men in order to conform to society's standards. However, anger doesn't just disappear. It comes out in other ways, like road rage, for instance. In postmodern America, we now have mass shooters in this country, which is a manifestation of unresolved anger dwelling underneath the surface of men that finally explodes. They've been told by women their entire life that it's not acceptable to get mad. I know I'm not a man and I don't have a son, but there's way too much man bashing that's going on in society, and it has to stop because men are people. It's not right. So now that we've talked about toxic masculinity, what is toxic femininity? Toxic femininity manifests itself in different ways, and like I said earlier, it can be a lot harder to detect because it's way more subtle. It's way more underhanded and devious. Just like how toxic masculinity embodies several different characteristics of traditional masculinity, toxic femininity does the same thing, but with feminine characteristics. However, there seems to be a disagreement on what exactly toxic femininity is. Many sources on the internet define toxic femininity as the forced adherence of women to behave in ways that are conventionally feminine. This restricts women to binary gender roles and limits their freedom in order for them to be more appealing to men. These feminine qualities include passiveness, selflessness, compliance, sensitivity, politeness, and compassion. According to an article from Healthline, environments like school, work, online, and social media contribute to toxic femininity whenever they normalize aspects of conventional gender roles, such as suggesting that women should shave their legs or have children. According to author Seema Anand, who writes about topics relating to intimacy between men and women, there are stereotypical attributes of women that are enforced by society and that cause women to conform to feminine stereotypes, which hold women back from success and the achievement of their goals. The presence of this form of toxic femininity coerces women to be quiet, loving, submissive, pretty, and cooperative. It also leads women to defer to the superior guidance of men, which impedes women's happiness and freedom by causing them to take a more submissive role in their relationships with men. And this is somehow suffocating for women because being a housewife and a stay-at-home mom is some kind of hellscape where they end up turning into Stepford wives. Even if this were true, what is so toxic about being a traditional wife? Where are all the victims of cooperation and politeness? I have a problem with this definition of toxic femininity because I really don't think girls and women are being coerced into being wives and mothers. In fact, I think it's the opposite. Feminism encourages women to behave like men in every way. Girls are trained from a young age that their future happiness depends on them establishing a good career before starting a family. They learn how to compete with men instead of how to collaborate with men. In our society, men have higher status than women. This means that there is status associated with masculinity, but not with femininity. Women rushed into the workforce and began doing the same jobs as men, but men did not enter into feminine jobs and roles. Feminists have pushed us to act more like men in order to raise our status, but when a man acts like a woman, he's lowering his status. The classic example of this, which isn't as relevant today as it was in the past, is that the tomboy who plays softball and likes G.I. Joes gets a pat on the back, but the boy who plays with Barbies is seen as a sissy. In my opinion, feminism should be called manism because it doesn't support the mature, sacred feminine at all. In fact, it opposes it. In our postmodern world, classically feminine traits are seen as bad because of feminism. The ability to be submissive, vulnerable, and nurturing as a wife and mother are not forms of abuse, nor do they rob women of their happiness. They are strengths. They're deserving of respect. When you talk about women, you're talking about billions of people. There are variations to everything. There are bell curves for everything, and it's nearly impossible for 4 billion people to all have the same preferences. But I do think that a traditional lifestyle where the woman is focused on her family over her career would be a good thing for the majority of women. The problem is that in our society, we've been indoctrinated by feminism to believe that femininity is weak and bad, and that masculinity is powerful and good. Being quiet, loving, submissive, and pretty are good things. They create a polarity between men and women in relationships that emphasizes the existing sexual dimorphism and creates more solidarity within male and female heterosexual relationships. When a woman is being traditionally feminine, she is also being kind, compassionate, and nurturing, which are all admirable traits. These characteristics aid her in raising her children and establishing healthy bonds with other people. If you're a woman, there is nothing wrong with embracing the divine, mature feminine inside of you. The other more accurate definitions of toxic femininity are based on the idea that there are feminine traits used by women to harm other people. Women have the ability to use their sexuality as a weapon in order to control the men in their lives. Additionally, they can be catty, conniving, and insincere to the point of viciousness, especially when they're attempting to bully another woman. A woman's level of duplicity will allow her to be kind and supportive to someone's face while simultaneously sabotaging them behind their back. In the past, being able to manipulate the behavior of others by being cunning and beguiling must have been advantageous because men are twice as strong as women, but in today's society, the misuse of these feminine characteristics can easily result in the unnecessary suffering of other people. One of the most well-known forms of toxic femininity is the classic Femme Fatale archetype, which is representative of a woman who uses her beauty and sexuality to commit crimes and take advantage of men through seduction and treachery. The Femme Fatale archetype has been largely exonerated by postmodern feminism, which has rebranded it as a woman who courageously defies boundaries and takes control over her life and sexuality. Sharon Stone played a Femme Fatale character in the movie Basic Instinct. Another example from Greek mythology are the sirens who tempted Odysseus and his men to swim out to meet their deaths at sea by using their enchanting voices. Women have a complex relationship with power. Most often they feel powerless in any given situation, and that's because fundamentally they are. Women are at a physiological disadvantage when compared with men. The average man is stronger than 97% of women. Through social and psychological evolution, women adapted to this asymmetry by using covert methods of manipulation. Women commonly resort to passive-aggressive behavior to gain status and to get closer to power. In the past, the only real source of power that women had over men was their sexuality, but we have since given that away. A large part of what makes something valuable is scarcity. When something is limited and in high demand, then it's also considered to be highly valuable. An example of this is the case of diamonds. So diamonds are not rare in nature. There's a company called De Beers who owns all of the diamond mines. They have a monopoly in the continent of Africa. And they limit the number of diamonds that go to the market for jewelers to purchase. Unlike gold, which is actually scarce, diamonds are very common. Essentially, they're just carbon, and carbon is abundant on Earth. De Beers has created an artificial scarcity as part of their marketing campaign, and it works because even though diamonds aren't rare in nature, it's still difficult to obtain them, and this is part of what makes them so valuable. There is a book by a woman named Louise Perry called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, which was published in 2022. In the book, it talks about the changes in social norms that took place as a result of the 1960s second wave feminism movement. According to this book, in the past, sexual access for men was more valuable than it is today because women kept it scarce by not losing their virginity until they were married. Even though there were definitely people who did have sex before marriage, by and large, it was a sexual norm that girls didn't deviate from. If men were interested in promiscuous and casual sex, then they would have to go through prostitutes to get it. Men had to make themselves suitable for marriage if they wanted an intimate relationship with a woman. But when the sexual revolution took place, women stopped guarding their virginity. The birth control pill gave women the ability to control their fertility, and legalized abortions made parenthood optional. During the sexual revolution, the ideology of feminism prevailed, which told women and girls that in order to be equal, women needed to start having sex like men, treating it like any other social interaction. Since that time, sexual expectations have changed under the pretense that there are no longer consequences of having sex, even though in reality that's not true. In today's society, a lot of young girls and women think their virginity is a burden that they must get rid of because they want to fit in with their peers. The problem is that sex is now cheap and easy to get, and the group that suffers from this state of affairs is women. The value of sex has decreased to the point where it's basically worthless, and with that, women have lost their only real power in the world. Powerless women take out their aggression on other women because it makes them feel like they're in control. If women began to gatekeep their sexuality like they did in the past, they would regain a lot of power, and they wouldn't feel the need to take out their resentment on other women in order to feel better. There's a surge of pleasure to be gained by having the ability to convince a group of people to ostracize another woman. When women abuse other women, their actions can be unbelievably cruel. Women often bully other women, especially at the workplace. Social exclusion is one of the most common tactics employed by female bullies who want to rob other women of status, move them further away from power, and destroy their reputations through gossip, backbiting, and spreading rumors. They will intentionally leave the targeted woman out of group activities and rally other members of the group to essentially shun them. Women become monsters when they do this to each other. When boys attack other boys through physical aggression at school, there are always consequences. Usually one or both boys is punished through suspension or expulsion. Fighting is not tolerated in public schools at all. However, there are no punishments when girls bully other girls through covert tactics. The answer is always more mental health care for the girls who are bullied and no punishment for the bullies themselves. In 2023, the CDC reported that the rate of suicidal ideation in teen girls has risen to 30% from 24% in 2019. This rise in girls having suicidal thoughts and feelings is attributed to the rise of online bullying that takes place on social media platforms like Instagram. Why do women bully other women? Oftentimes it's because of jealousy. Why are women so threatened by each other? The answer lies in the expectations for women when they go out with men. If you're a female and you go on a first date with a high-status guy, the expectation is that you will sleep with him on the first date. If you choose not to, there are so many other women who will, and he's likely to not go out with you again because he can find what he's looking for with relative ease from someone else. However, if you do sleep with him on the first date, your value as a woman will be reduced. You will depreciate in value as you experience the shame that comes with casual one-time sexual encounters. So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Some people include slut-shaming as a form of lateral abuse and toxic femininity that must be addressed and dealt with. Slut-shaming is when women accuse other women of being too sexual. It can take the form of belittling a woman for wearing revealing clothing or slandering women behind their backs by engaging in overly sexual behavior. Due to the influence of modern woke and feminist ideologies in Western society, which promote sex positivity for both sexes, women are now highly discouraged from slut-shaming other women. It's become unacceptable in our society, which is obsessed with tolerance. I read a book about narcissism one time that said the origins of narcissism in people is rooted in shame. The problem that narcissistic people have is that they can't, under any circumstances, tolerate the feeling of shame. But the problem is that a certain amount of healthy shame is good for people, and enforcing that shame can be productive. The goal of people who slut shame is to humiliate women who are promiscuous, and this serves a purpose in society. These women are lacking in humility, and there's a sense of shame that occurs organically in women who have one-night stands. In college dorms, it's called the walk of shame that happens when a woman leaves the dorm room of a guy she just slept with the next morning, and everybody knows what happened the night before. Healthy shame helps people to respect boundaries and rules. If women were more reluctant to sleep with men they just met, then the expectations of a first date would change. Women sabotage themselves when they behave this way. Shame keeps people aligned and helps them to maintain relationships. Due to female hypergamy, women are selective about who they want to sleep with. This comes from evolution and from women wanting the best DNA for their offspring. It's a totally natural thing, but it becomes toxic when all women are competing against each other for the top 10% of men, and these men who are in the upper echelon of valuable men, in reality are not going to be the best fathers for their offspring. I think the phenomenon of passport bros is interesting. Passport bros are men who go to other less developed countries to find a wife. They do this because women in other countries aren't nearly as judgmental about men and are more likely to be happy with a man the way he is, unlike American women and their impossible criteria. This is an example of how a feminine trait like hypergamy, in the right context, can be toxic. It results in women never finding a husband at all because they're far too picky and women are too promiscuous. Gossip, social exclusion, and slander do so much harm to women, and it causes the kind of wounds that leave no bruises or scars. And the problem with that kind of abuse is that you don't have any physical proof of its existence. Women will give terrible advice to other women as an underhanded way of eliminating their competition, and I find this kind of deception to be the sign of a weak and immature mind. Dear men, if you see a woman who practices toxic femininity, don't date her. Women pass on their morality to their children. Do you want your children to inherit bad morals? All right, so now I'm going to talk about something called the Devouring Mother. There are different ways in which the Devouring Mother archetype comes to fruition. The term comes from Carl Jung in his analysis of the shadow variation of the mother and father archetypes, with the father becoming the tyrannical father and the mother becoming the devouring mother. Both terms apply to parents who psychologically damage and impair their own children. The devouring mother emerges in different ways, but is characterized by selfishness and narcissism. It also produces children who are at a disadvantage in their adulthood. In each case of the devouring mother, the child is always there for her, and not the other way around. The strength and intensity of the maternal instinct in women, I think, is hard for men to understand or imagine. I guess it can be compared to the sex drive that men experience as far as intensity level. Men are not programmed to raise children who aren't biologically theirs, but for women it's incredibly easy to love someone else's child. Until birth control became widely available, women used to have a lot more children than they have today. They would typically marry young and start giving birth to children in their early 20s. The typical American woman gave birth to 7 children on average in the 1800s. Today, women have 1 to 2 children on average, and they give birth later in their lives. The social and economic climate has mandated that women must work full-time jobs and contribute to 2-income households. They're also expected to clean the house, make dinner, and raise the children. Men did not step into the feminine role the same way that women stepped into the masculine role. Women are not having as many children as they used to, and this causes the maternal instinct to become suppressed and misdirected toward other areas of life. It comes out in subversive and unhealthy ways. One of these ways is through the infantilization of everyone and everything. This is something that is common among women who fulfill the archetype of the devouring mother, and is a prominent form of toxic femininity that often goes overlooked and under-investigated. Infantilization takes place when someone is being treated like a small child or a baby when they're actually adolescents or adults. This can take the form of coddling, spoiling, being condescending, making decisions for another person as though they're incompetent, and doing things for someone that they can do themselves. This mostly occurs in parent-child relationships, but it can happen in the workplace as well. When a mother inappropriately infantilizes her child, it can negatively impact that child's self-confidence and thwart their chances for independence. It's fairly common to see women who infantilize their pets, baby talking to them and pampering them as though they were human children. I'm pretty sure this is why someone invented sweaters for dogs. There's a movie called Interview with a Vampire that stars Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, they both play vampires in the movie. In the movie, vampires are immortal. Kirsten Dunst is also in the movie, and she portrays a child vampire who never gets any older because she was turned into a vampire as a child. I remember this part of the movie bothering me quite a bit because I was disturbed by the idea of being permanently stuck as a child forever and never having the chance to become an adult. Children who are infantilized are kind of like that in that they remain immature and naive into adulthood because the adults who raised them did everything for them. The maternal instinct is the source of goodness in the world. There's no greater love than the love between a mother and her child. It's almost hard to imagine how something so innocent can be so harmful when misdirected. When someone has become infantilized by their mother or mother figure, it decreases their capacity to function as adults. One form of the devouring mother is neglectful because she's engrossed in her own world. She's preoccupied with her career and her personal and professional goals. She's more invested in her wants and needs than the wants and needs of her children. This is the mother who has no time for her kids because she's always at work and pursuing her own interests. The children learn silently that they're nothing more than an annoyance and that their wants and needs don't matter. These are the women who scowl at me when I tell them I'm a stay-at-home mom. They think I'm like the scum of the earth or that I'm really lazy. But what's happening is that deep down, my existence doesn't affirm their life choices, and they take offense to that. What women like this don't seem to understand is that there's a trade-off for everything. I live in a small house. It's really old. I don't have a dishwasher. I've never bought a designer handbag. I get all my stuff from Goodwill. Every time I go to the grocery store, I run to the discounted meat section, pushing senior citizens out of the way. And if you're one of those snobs who would never purchase discounted meat, keep being you, because that's more for me. Another form of the devouring mother is the one who is hyper-focused on controlling the lives of her children. These mothers don't allow their children to make mistakes or make their own choices. They're judgmental, demeaning, stubborn, argumentative, and they have to be right. Her attitude is that mom knows best, and that's why she keeps an eye on her children at all times. This mother is so overbearing that her children get to the point where they no longer have a will of their own, and they grow into insecure adults who are too afraid of failure to take any risks. In both cases, whether she realizes it or not, the devouring mother wants her children to remain children mentally and fully reliant on her, and this sabotages their future. Like I said earlier, the child is there for her and not the other way around. Jordan Peterson refers to Hansel and Gretel when he talks about the devouring mother. In the story, the children have a stepmother who doesn't want them around because they interfere with her relationship with their father, and she thinks they're not worth feeding. Because of her being inconvenienced by them, they end up getting lost in the forest and are drawn to a house made of candy, where the narcissistic witch lives who wants to eat them. If you're a mother who has a tendency to infantilize people, including your children, it doesn't necessarily make you a bad mother. Kids don't come with a manual, and it's easy to give in to your maternal urges, especially if you wish you had more children than you do. I think the majority of mothers who infantilize their children are doing so out of good intentions, because generally speaking, women love babies. They can't help it. We also live in a society that's not so family and child friendly as it once was. When it comes to matters of motherhood, it's very difficult to learn how to be a mom from someone who isn't your mom. Girls who grow up without mothers and sisters have to learn about parenting through first-hand experience. And so it's only rational that many women will make mistakes along the way. As long as you're willing to learn and you're willing to be selfless in raising children, there's always room to grow and become a better parent. Think about what your child deserves and how you can facilitate a worthy future for them. So this is the end of the video. As always, thank you for watching and listening. If you have any thoughts on toxic femininity, feel free to leave me a comment down below. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.